So would you guys give him another hand, welcome him up here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was, I need you to walk around me and just announce me as I arrive at places. That would be kind of awesome. What's up, guys? I am Jared Worthington, and I'm going to tell you right off the bat, everybody's over here, and there's nobody right here, and I know everyone else has said that when they've gotten up here, but it is super weird. So what I'm going to ask next week is that we move the entire stage and just kind of angle it a little bit in this direction. If you're at home, thank you guys for joining us. This is a really cool, awesome opportunity that we have here in the park, but we are also very excited that you are able to join us at home, and so I hope you can take the next few minutes, maybe just relax and get into the Word with us. As Thad pointed out earlier, I am an elementary school principal. I am currently looking for someone to volunteer their time to respond to my email inbox because I'd rather not do it right now. It is a lot of stuff. I actually had a parent send me an email last week and ask me if I would call the governor and tell him that we want to be back in school all 5 days. Like, I don't know who you think I am or what kind of pull I have, but it's not that. It's an eventful time. And unfortunately, it has taken away from something that I absolutely love. And it's not baseball. I can still watch baseball. But most of you know, and I think I've actually used a couple of stories from this, I love to go hiking. I've been on the Appalachian Trail almost every year for the past 16 years. I've done different parts of the trail, different sections, and kind of gotten used to being able to be out in the woods and disconnecting. One of the things I enjoy about it is that my brother and I are able to take some people along with us for their first hikes and kind of teach them the ways of the woods. We were able this past year to take several of our church friends with us. We've got all of our elders here today, I think, and they were all able to go on their very first hike with us on the Appalachian Trail, not their first hike, but their first hike on the Appalachian Trail. I was really excited because Eric got to come and he wasn't allowed to fix his hair. It just had to go as is. I felt like that was important for him to not be able to look into a mirror for a couple of minutes and think about his life choices. We had a great time. But anytime we're bringing somebody new, one of the things we want to do is try to teach them some things, some mistakes that we made along the way before they ever step on the trail, because we don't want them to follow in the footsteps that we originally took in making some of those mistakes. And in general, we talk about things like what you pack, what you want to wear, what your pack should weigh before you leave, the things that you need to bring with you that are going to help you be successful. But there are three very common rules that happen along the Appalachian Trail. And the rules are very simple. You may have heard them before. The first rule is leave no trace. And the idea behind leave no trace is that when you're on the Appalachian Trail, whatever you bring in, you also bring out. And the idea is that you don't want to leave a footprint so that someone else can even tell that you've been there before. The second rule is pretty simple as well. Respect the land. It's not yours. It's gifted to us by the United States government, and we are able to use it, and we want to make sure that it is well used and able to accommodate the people that are coming after us. So those are the first two rules. But the third rule is simple but complex at the same time, and it's very, very easy to say. It's follow the path. If you actually look at the Appalachian Trail, it's a space of about 2 feet across, and it's just a dirt trail. But that dirt trail goes for over 2,000 miles. It runs from Springer Mountain, Georgia, all the way to Mount Katahdin. If you're from the south, you can say Katahdin. I think if you're from the north, you say Katahdin. I don't know. But it's a 2,000-mile trail that's only about 2 feet wide. And the most important thing you can do is to stay on it. Because even though the trail is very clearly outlined in this 2-foot wide space, there are other trails that cross it, and it crosses over roads, and it goes in valleys and up on top of mountains, and there are lots of ways for you to get off of the trail. In order for us to make sure that we stay on the trail, the originators of it did something called blaze it. Now, if you've ever heard the term blaze the trail, it's an Old Norse saying that simply means you're going to leave markings so that the people that are coming behind you will know how to follow the same path that you took. And in blazing the trail, what they hoped was that people would not get lost along the way. And in fact, on the Appalachian Trail, as you go in, you would arrive at your very first spot. And from the very first steps that you take, you should be able to look out. And just a little bit down the path, you would see a tree with a white blaze. It's about 2 inches long and about 6 inches long and about 2 inches across. And that white blaze tells you to follow the path to that next tree. And when you get to that tree, you should be able to look down the path and see the next blaze. And so on, all the way down the Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine. So in theory, I would be able to look at these blazes and know that I'm on the right path. Most of you probably have figured out where we're going with this. We are a kind of a new church. I mean, we've been here for 4 years. That's still fairly new. But we're also new in that we've turned over a new leaf in our church name and in some of the independence and things that we're doing as a church body. And maybe you're a new Christian today, or maybe you're going through something as a Christian that you've never gone through before. And so what we wanted to do is take some time to talk about the blazes in life that you can look for as a new Christian community, as a new church, as a new body of believers, as a new individual, or maybe as you experience something new. We've been in the book of Acts, and that's where we're going to continue today. We're going to be in Acts chapter 5. So if you have your Bible with you, you can turn there. If you have your phone or tablet, we're going to be in the ESV version today. That's kind of my home base. I like to flow from the ESV. And we're going to start in chapter 5, and we're going to be in verse 12. This is kind of a long passage today, and so we're going to take some time to break it down. But I want to talk to you about 4 different blazes that you can expect to see along the way. 4 different signs, 4 different things that you can use to help you know that you're on the right path. We're going to start in verse 12, and I'm going to initially begin with verses 12 through 16. And the first blaze is really simple. I like to call this blaze the adrenaline rush. This is the adrenaline rush blaze, and so we're starting here. In verse 12, it says, "Now many signs and wonders were regularly done among the people by the hands of the apostles. And they were all together in Solomon's portico. None of the rest dared join them, but the people held them in high esteem. And more than ever, believers were added to the Lord, multitudes of both men and women, so that they even carried out the sick into the streets and laid them on cots and mats, that as Peter came by, at least his shadow might fall on some of them. The people also gathered from the towns around Jerusalem, bringing the sick and those afflicted with unclean spirits, and they were healed." To give you a little bit of reference here, this is the early stages of the Christian church. As a matter of fact, it was so early they weren't actually calling themselves Christian. There were a lot of names that were being floated around, but there wasn't one particular name that meant you were a follower of Christ. A lot of people were kind of referring to this as the way, but in these initial steps, this was just a group of people that were walking around and talking. And so you can imagine what it feels like to see this new group of people, this new wave of influence to sweep over the land. And right at the beginning of this, a lot of people joined the bandwagon. And if you think about that first moment in anything that's brand new, there's a lot of jitters and there's a lot of nerves, but there's a lot of emotion and there's a lot of excitement. It's almost euphoric. I like to think of it as the very beginning of any sporting event that you attend. The first few minutes are absolutely awesome. I don't know if soccer is actually considered a sport, but if it is, the first couple of minutes of it are very intense. In baseball, we refer to it as the first inning jitters. It's that nervous feeling about the beginning of something that is kind of getting you fired up. Or maybe the first few minutes after your child is born, right before you have to change that first diaper. If you've not had a child before, that first diaper is just the worst thing I've ever seen. But right before that, it is an incredible feeling. It is literally a volcanic eruption of emotion that pours through you. And almost every time we see the start of something new, especially in the church community, what we see is this groundswell of feeling, this groundswell of excitement, this groundswell of just emotion that people go through. And sometimes it's difficult to maintain or find balance within that emotion. But very often what we see is people who arrive at Christ, who decide to follow Christ, and they immediately make giant changes in their life. And those giant changes come in different ways. I remember when I was a young Christian and I attended a Christian camp and I got really fired up about what I was doing, and I took all of my contemporary music CDs and I burnt them in a fire with another group of people because we thought that what we needed to do was eliminate all of the bad and only insert the good. And I think back now and like, man, that Dr. Dre album was awesome. And I hate the fact that I set it on fire. I really want to go back to it. But those kinds of moments happen to us in this euphoric sense as we begin something. But of course, we also know that just like those apostles that started out at the very beginning, that adrenaline rush will only carry you so far. And getting to that first blaze does not mean that you are at the finish line. What we're going to do next is we're going to turn to verse 17, and we're going to start reading from there. This passage, this section of this story is a little bit long, but I want to make sure we get to verse 17 through 33 in this part. For blaze number 2, what we want you to look for are the issues that come up right as the adrenaline is at its peak. So we start in verse 17, and he says, But the high priest rose up, and all who were with him, that is, the party of the Sadducees. And filled with jealousy, they arrested the apostles and put them in public prison. Pause there. You've got to imagine for a moment that these are guys who run the show. These are guys who practice the law, who know the law. They are the judge and the jury of the entire community. And so suddenly they see this new group, Peter and the apostles. They are walking through town, and they are magnets for people in the community. They are pulling others to follow them. And suddenly, the high priest and the Sadducees, they see that their authority is starting to dwindle. And so, they arrest Peter and his friends. And so in verse 19 it says, But during the night an angel of the Lord opened the prison doors and brought them out and said, Go, stand in the temple and speak to the people all the words of this life. And when they had heard this, they entered the temple at daybreak and began to teach. Now when the high priest came, and those who were with him, they called together the council and all the senate of the people of Israel, and sent to the prison to have them brought. But when the officers came, they did not find them in the prison, so they returned and reported, We have found the prison securely locked, and the guards standing at the doors. But when we opened them, we found no one inside. Now, when the captain of the temple and the chief priests heard these words, they were greatly perplexed about them, wondering what this would come to. And someone came to them and said, Look, the men whom you put in prison are standing in the temple and teaching the people. Then the captain with the officers went and brought them, but not by force, for they were afraid of being stoned by the people. And when they had brought them, they set them before the council, and the high priest questioned him, saying, We strictly charged you, do not teach in this name, yet here you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching, and you intend to bring this man's, meaning Jesus' blood, upon us. But Peter and the apostles answered, We must obey God rather than man. The God of our fathers raised Jesus, whom you killed by hanging on a tree. God exalted him at his right hand as leader and savior to give repentance to Israel and forgiveness of sins. And we are witnesses to these things, and so is the Holy Spirit, whom God has given to those who obey him. And verse 33 says, When they heard this, they were enraged and wanted to kill them. That second blaze is really tough because typically the second blaze comes as you begin to go uphill. In this story, what we're finding out is that Peter and the apostles have decided to preach the word. They've been arrested for preaching the word. They get out of prison and they start preaching the word again. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were arrested for doing something, I would have to question myself before I decided to do it again. I would have to take some time and really think through what I was going to do. I would have to decide whether or not what I was doing was actually worth doing. Because, I mean, let's face it, I would not do well in prison. I don't think many of us would sit back and think, yeah, man, I could use that kind of vacation. That is the social distancing that I need in 2020. I don't think that that's something that we look to as a really great idea. But in this moment with Peter and the apostles, they entered into the biological term of fight or flight. Standing in front of people who decided that they hated them and wanted them dead, they had to choose whether or not they were going to continue doing what they had done. One of the first maybe 3 or 4 times that I went hiking, I think it was maybe 3rd or 4th year, my brother and I have got a couple of friends with us, and we're hiking in this area that is just south of the Great Smoky Mountains, and it's known for its bear population. And one of the things you have to do in this area is that you have to hang your food at night. And so you take a rope and you've got a rock and you throw it over a limb that would be too small for a larger bear to hang on to. And after the rock comes back down, you tie your food to it, you lift it up in the air, and you leave it hanging at night so that you don't have to worry about it being eaten by an animal. Now, I want to remind you guys that at this time, I thought I was the coolest person on the planet. This is way before my hair started falling out. This is way before I couldn't control my beard or nose hair or anything like that. This was a time when I thought that I was good at what I did. And so it's getting close to night. My brother and I, we've made camp. We've got a couple of friends. We're all hanging out, and it's probably 10 o'clock. It's probably past when we should have been asleep, and we start hearing these sounds, and it sounds like thumping. It sounds like stomping. It sounds like something is behind us. Now, when you camp on the Appalachian Trail, there are these things called shelters, and it's just a wood floor. It's got 3 sides and a roof, and it allows you to sleep in there if you need to. And so we were in this shelter, and we are hearing something behind us. And it only took us about 30 seconds to realize that there was a bear trying to get our food. Now, in that moment, there are 2 different Jareds. There is the Jared that everybody saw, which was, I've got my hatchet, and I have got a stick, and if this bear doesn't let go of my food, we are going to have a problem. I am talking junk about this bear. I am fired up. I am ready to go. And then there's the inside Jared that said, if I actually see the bear, I don't care if it's the size of a rabbit, I'm running until I get all the way back to the car. I didn't want anybody to see inside Jared, so I tried to show outside Jared. The entire night, we stayed up hearing this bear. We stayed up listening to him try to attack our food. We stayed up throwing rocks into the woods and yelling, hoping that this giant bear was going to leave us. Now, Ben and I tell this story all the time. The part we leave out is that in the morning we figured out it was just a bunch of squirrels that were after the food, and they were completely destroying it because squirrels, turns out, can climb trees, can climb ropes, can get into food anywhere. So it wasn't a bear. Fight or flight for me, on the inside, I guarantee you, it was going to be flight. I had made up my mind that I was going to run. I was going to trip other people around me. It didn't matter what happened so long as I was successfully able to breathe the next day. For Peter and the apostles, at this moment, they're deciding, am I going to run from my first hurdle in life? Church is new. I mean, this is something that's so small that if Peter and the apostles had decided right then and there, I'm done with this, the Christian faith is not what we know it today. They had to make a decision to fight for something that they believed in. But in that moment, they are standing in front of people who have the authority, they have the ability, and now they have the motivation to see them dead. And that brings us to our third blaze. Our third blaze is one that I greatly appreciate, and it's called, I Get By With a Little Help from My Friends. This is found in verse 33 through 37, so we're going to read these 4 verses, but there's a second part that we're going to refer back to earlier in the story. And so going back to verse 33, it picks up there, and it says, when they heard this, they were enraged. They wanted to kill them. But a Pharisee in the council named, I'm going to try to say this name right. I'm going to say it like he was from Indian Trail, so that's Gamaliel. That rolled off the tongue way too easy for someone like me. So Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, held in high honor by all the people, stood up and gave orders to put the men outside for a little while. And he said to them, "Men of Israel, take care what you are about to do with these men. For before these days, Theudas rose up, claiming to be somebody, and a number of men, about 400, joined him. He was killed, and all who followed him were dispersed and came to nothing. After him, Judas the Galilean rose up in those days of the census, and drew away some of the people after him. He too perished, and all who followed him were scattered." So if we stop there, in this story so far, we've seen two different times in which something that was completely out of the control of the apostles and Peter swooped in to save the day. Sometimes along this path, that third blaze is receiving help when you least expect it. Sometimes during the most difficult moments of your life, receiving help from others is exactly what we need. If we take this guy, Gamaliel, I really hope I'm saying that name right. I think he's been dead for like 2,000 years, so it might not matter, but still. I mean, let's take him for a second. Back up and look at his original story. There were two strong trains of thought for the Jewish law at this time. The first one was a very strict following of the law, the first 5 books of the Bible, a very strict following. And then there was a much broader view that N.T. Wright says, he refers to it as live and let live. And it's possible and probable that Gamaliel followed this style of teaching for the Jewish law, which simply meant that my interpretation of Jewish law might not quite be the same as yours. But let's be very careful about who this person was. He's not a Christian. He's not somebody that's following Jesus. He's not somebody that has decided to follow the way or accept Peter's teachings. And yet still, God found a way to use this person and this situation to help when it was unexpected. If you go back even further, Peter and the apostles, they're in prison. And it says that an angel came to them and brought them outside of the prison and said, "Go and teach again." I mean, I don't do anything and think, "Oh, you know what? It doesn't matter what I do because an angel's coming later and they're going to save me." At no point did Peter say, "Hey guys, listen, we're getting ready to be arrested. It's all good. I got a tweet from God. He's sending an angel down in just a few minutes. He's got the keys. Don't even worry about it." They had no clue what was really going to happen to them. And so the fact that this angel comes, brings them out of prison, despite the fact that it was securely locked, well guarded, puts them back in the temple and says, "Now preach the word." And then these people decide to continue doing it, knowing that they have the chance of being arrested again and of being killed. They still choose to do it. And then further from there, a person, a non-believer, stands up and defends them. And just by the words that he is saying, he begins to turn the entire tide. The entire event is shifted by the words that he uses. Sometimes from unexpected places come unbelievable outcomes. So as you're along your journey right now, we like to think about these things. And on this third blaze, we think about how many times people have helped us along the way when we least expected it. As a new community, as a new church community, one of the things that we're expected to do is be there when others least expect it. And we have an opportunity here in Indian Trail as we begin this new adventure to change the dynamic of the things that are happening in and around us. And I think it starts with being there unexpectedly. This is a time of crisis. We've been talking about COVID now for the entire year. I almost said school year. That's where my mind is. We've been talking about this for a long time. It affects everything. We are socially distanced. We are wearing masks. We are having to reach out to those that we normally wouldn't reach out to. People have lost their jobs. They're beginning to lose their homes and their places to live. We are a church that's meeting outside. Right now, the place that we normally meet, we're not able to be there. But I think about the times that people have stepped in to help along the way. I mean, they didn't have to give us this space. Yeah, we have to find places where the shade is. No, I don't know how to turn on the AC out here. But we're here and able to worship God because somebody said, hey, I've got a great place for you. And it's free. You don't have to pay anything to come here and worship God. Completely unexpected, in an absolute moment of crisis, when we were unsure of what our next step might be, and we were having to look at being committed to being fully online for the entire time that we are in crisis mode, someone stepped up out of nowhere and said, I've got an idea. And so for Blaze 3, that unexpected help is oftentimes the most crucial part of a person's life. If you're a Christian here today, I would tell you that that third blaze only happens when you step up and you are the one who paints it on the tree. I would say that if you're a Christian and you're listening to this today, it is your duty, it is your obligation, it's your responsibility to be the unexpected help for this community, for the community around you, for your family, for your friends. It is your duty to be that person because someone else was that person for you beforehand. I was in the kitchen yesterday, proving that I could cook. The debate rages on. I was in the kitchen, and my son is in the living room, and he asks for a banana. He wants to eat a banana. So I said, yeah, you can get a banana. And my wife, Katie, she's here. She said, Camden, yeah, just go right there and get a banana. And he said, why do I always have to go do things for myself? And I thought that my wife might hit him with the microwave. Did not happen. But my initial thought was, oh no, I don't want to know what happens next. But very simply, what we said was, hey, Cam, we do a lot of stuff for you that you don't see. We do a lot of things that you don't know about. So the least you can do is get off of the couch and get yourself a banana. Later in life, he'll look back and he'll think, wow, my parents got a lot of bananas for me over my lifetime. But for now, he doesn't get that. And the one caveat that I would add to the third blaze is this. The people that painted the blaze there have no clue who comes by to use it later. Sometimes with that third blaze, with that unexpected support, you have to do it knowing that it won't be reciprocated. You have to put that blaze there for others, knowing that they may not appreciate it and that they almost certainly may take it for granted at some point. But that leads me to my fourth point. Aiden's going to come up here and help me with it. The fourth blaze in this, it starts in verse 38 and it ends in verse 42. And I would refer to this blaze as your starting point sets the finish line. Anytime we are deciding that we're going to go on a hike, there's a couple of things that we have to do. One of the big ones is to set out an itinerary. We want to make sure that people know that we're going to start on this point. On this day, we're going to be here. On this day, we plan to sleep here. We're going to end on this point. And if you don't hear from me by this time, then you need to assume that I fell off the side of the cliff and that I am dangling by one toe and I need you to come find me. That itinerary is very, very important. I'll save a story about me having to call my wife in the middle of losing the trail maybe for another day. But as we look at verse 38 through 42, Gamaliel is closing out his speech. He's closing out his quotes, if you will, to the other Sadducees in the room. And he says this. So in the present case, I tell you, keep away from these men and let them alone. For if this plan or this undertaking is of man, it will fail. But if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them. You might even be found opposing God." So they took his advice, and when they had called in the apostles, they beat them and charged them not to speak in the name of Jesus, and let them go. Then they left the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer dishonor for the name. And every day in the temple and from house to house, they did not cease teaching and preaching the name of Jesus Christ. There's an entire sermon devoted to these passages. And trying to unpack it a little bit here, there are two very important parts to this. The first thing is that Gamaliel makes an amazing point. He says that if something is started and it's of man, it's almost absolute that it is going to collapse in on itself. But if something is built or started on God, there's nothing you can do to stand in its way. There's nothing humanly possible that can happen to keep it from becoming a reality. I like to think of this as an earth-shifting moment for the Christian community, for the Christian church, for Peter and the apostles right here in this. And as the band comes up and we look to finish this, I'm going to close with Blaze number 4 in talking about what it means to start everything that you're doing with God first, so that the finish line is something that is worth getting to. So for that, I would like to remind you a little bit about Peter and the apostles in this moment. So here we are. This group of men arrested for the second time and standing in front of a group of people who are enraged and have the motivation and the authority and the willingness to kill them on the spot. Yet they are defiant. We stand here and we see Peter and his friends, after being beaten, it says, and choosing to tell people about Jesus nonetheless. Literally happy that they can count themselves among the others that have been beaten before them for the same purpose. I think it's important here for us to realize that despite the fact that they dealt with such trial and such tribulation, that they decided to start their path on Christ, they decided to continue that path despite the fact that they had difficult situations, and they continued on, maybe not necessarily without fear, but almost certainly with an amazing abundance of courage that you could never see fighting off a bear or squirrels in the woods. This is what I love about this. If you look at Matthew chapter 5, verse 11 and 12, it says, "Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who came before you." Psalm 118, verse 6. This is one of my favorite verses in the entire Bible. It says, "The Lord is on my side. I will not be afraid. What can mere man do to me?" Put it very simply, there's nothing that we can't accomplish as a community of believers when we decided to turn our focus on God on the first step. When the first blaze that we have in front of us is one devoted to the glory of God, the rest of the blazes lay themselves out so that when you stand beside that tree, you see the next step on your journey. I would say that when we follow Christ, we don't need to worry whether or not our path is right. We don't need to worry whether or not our fear is unwarranted or whether our courage is unwarranted. We don't need to worry that our energy, that our emotion is being poured out for something that's worthless. We don't need to worry about whether or not the things that we are doing is going to be in vain. I would say that absolutely, while we suffer, we also know that it's worth it. I would say God's guidance is enough. I would say through trials, through hurdles, the greatest contribution to the kingdom of heaven that you can have right now is your endurance to be able to continue along the path. I would say that I want to live in a world where we have a community of believers devoted to helping others by putting up blazes so that the ones that come behind us can know how to follow. I want to live in a world where the devil hates to hear my name. I want to live in a world where 704 Church means fight, never flight. I want to live in a world where Indian Trail starts out in one place and ends in another, that is the expansion of the kingdom of heaven because of the decisions that we made when we first stepped out on this path. I want to be in a place where that adrenaline and that energy is so intense that it carries us and it forces people to want to be in on the bandwagon. I want to live in a world where the emotion that we pour out is so heavy that it weighs on others to the point that they can't help but find out what Jesus really is. So I'm going to ask you a simple question. This is a great time for reflection here. We've talked about the path in different ways. We've talked about the path as a community of believers that we're on. We've talked about the path as Big C Church, our entire church world. If we think about the path for a second as the one that you, the individual, are walking right now, I would ask you a simple question. What path are you on? What hurdles are you intentionally avoiding along that path? Are the blazes the right ones? What blazes are you putting down on your path for others to follow? At what point are you going to step in to be the unexpected help? Or maybe just as important, is right now the time that you need to cry out to God for His unexpected help? What valleys do you need help out of? You see, the church was created to be the bride of Christ. And in it, our hope is to provide refuge to our community. That's why 704 Church we use this motto. On our logo, it says, follow, become, and do. That path is all about the word do. And how you take those steps are going to matter to every person that comes afterwards. Thank you also to Vivian for not disrupting everybody enough today. Good job, girl. Way to handle things over there. I want to leave you with this. One of the great things that we learned when we first started walking on the Appalachian Trail is that there is a huge community online that have countless pieces of advice and information and details and things that helped us along the way. And I asked a couple of times online, is this worth it? Is going on this hike worth it at all? And so now that we like to bring newcomers to the trail, we see those first few steps on the blaze, and we know it's a struggle. They look at us like, why did you bring me here? Why am I doing this? Why did I bring a 3-pound chunk of cheese with me on the trail? I think one of the cool things about this is that I know, because I've been there, that if they can just make it through those blazes, that the peak is absolutely worth the very beginning. And so today I would ask you, if you're questioning, if you're unsure about your path, if you're unsure of what your next step should be, instead of asking somebody, what should my next step be? Ask them, hey, are the steps worth it? And let them give you their reasoning for why they're on this path in the first place. I promise you, you won't be let down. And so I would ask now that you throw your hands up as Vivian decides to make one final triumphant return to the stage. We're going to ask you to take your hands out with me. Here. And I would say, men and women of 704 Church, may you be encouraged by the steps that you're on. May you look for others to help blaze their own trail. And may you look to the ones who have blazed the trail before you for inspiration, for leadership, for guidance. But most importantly, through all of it, that we assure that the path we're on is one created and started by God. Go in peace.